The nuclear submarine's red emergency lights cast blood-colored shadows across Commander Sarah Chen's face as armed security dragged her toward the airlock. 24 hours ago, she was the most trusted officer on the USS Leviathan. Now, branded a traitor, she was being cast into the freezing Atlantic with nothing but a life raft and the knowledge that her missile authorization codes were the only thing standing between her betrayers and global annihilation. As the airlock sealed behind her, Sarah smiled through her tears. They had no idea what she'd really done to their precious weapons system. The storm had been building for 3 days, when Commander Sarah Chen first noticed the encrypted messages flowing through channels that shouldn't exist. She sat hunched over her workstation in the USS Leviathan's cramped communications hub, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that painted her Asian features in cold blue light. Outside the titanium hull, the North Atlantic churned. With 30-foot swells, but 200 feet below the surface, the nuclear submarine cut through the darkness like a predator stalking prey. "Ma'am, we've got another anomaly in the command structure," Petty Officer Martinez whispered, glancing nervously toward the sealed blast door. His young face was pale with exhaustion. They'd all been pulling double shifts since the diplomatic crisis began. Sarah's dark eyes narrowed as she pulled up the data stream. For 6 months, she'd been tracking irregular communications patterns, following digital breadcrumbs that led to a conspiracy so vast it made her stomach turn. Now, with tensions between the U.S. and China at their highest point since the Cold War, those breadcrumbs had become a highway paved with treason. "Show me," she commanded, her voice barely audible above the submarine's mechanical hum. Martinez's trembling fingers highlighted a series of encrypted bursts transmitted during the night watch. To anyone else, they would appear as routine maintenance protocols, but Sarah had designed half the Leviathan's communication systems. She knew every legitimate byte that flowed through these networks. "They're using my own encryption keys," she breathed, ice flooding her veins. "Someone with command-level access is selling our launch procedures to the Chinese." The blast door hissed open behind them. Sarah spun in her chair to find Captain James Morrison striding into the communications bay, his weathered face set in hard lines. Behind him came Lieutenant Commander Bradley Hughes, the submarine's executive officer, whose pale blue eyes held a coldness that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Commander Chen," Morrison's gravelly voice carried the weight of command. "Report to the briefing room, now." Sarah saved her work with practiced efficiency, her mind racing. Morrison had been her mentor for 5 years, the closest thing to a father she'd had since joining the Navy. But lately, something had changed in his demeanor, a distance that felt like ice between them. "Sir, I've discovered evidence of—" "The briefing room, Commander. That's an order." The walk through the submarine's narrow corridors felt like a death march. Crew members she'd served with for years averted their eyes as she passed. The familiar sounds of the Leviathan, the hum of ventilation systems, the distant ping of sonar, the muffled conversations of sailors going about their duties, seemed muted, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. The briefing room was cramped and utilitarian, dominated by a holographic display table that currently showed a map of the South China Sea. Red and blue icons dotted the tactical display like drops of blood on blue silk. Sarah took her usual seat across from Morrison, but Hughes remained standing, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. "Commander Chen," Morrison began, his gray eyes avoiding hers, "it's come to our attention that classified launch protocols have been compromised." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes, sir. That's exactly what I've been investigating. I've traced the breach to you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at Morrison, searching his weathered face for any sign of the man who had championed her career, who had fought for her promotion to the most sensitive position aboard the most advanced submarine in the fleet. "Sir, that's impossible. I designed those security measures. I would never. Hughes stepped forward, his pale eyes glittering with something that might have been satisfaction. We have evidence, Commander. Digital forensics show that your personal access codes were used to transmit tactical data to Chinese intelligence assets over the past 6 months. Sarah shot to her feet, her chair clattering against the bulkhead. That's a lie. Someone is using my codes, yes, but I'm not the one. Sit down. Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. Sarah remained standing, her hands clenched into fists. Through the porthole behind Morrison's head, she could see the dark waters of the Atlantic rushing past. Somewhere above them, diplomatic channels were burning as Chinese naval forces massed in the Taiwan Strait. And somewhere in this submarine, a traitor was positioning America's most advanced nuclear deterrent like a chess piece on a board only they could see. Captain, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, if you'll just let me show you my findings. Your clearance has been revoked, Hughes interrupted, producing a tablet from his jacket pocket. By order of Naval Intelligence, you are hereby relieved of all duties pending a full investigation. The tablet's screen showed official documents bearing the seals of the Pentagon and Pacific Fleet Command. Sarah's security credentials had been stripped away with surgical precision, cutting her off from every system she'd spent years mastering. This is insane, she whispered. Morrison, you know me. You know I would never betray my country. For the first time, Morrison met her eyes. What she saw there broke something deep inside her chest, not anger or disappointment, but a hollow resignation that spoke of orders from far above his pay grade. I know what the evidence shows, he said quietly, and right now, that evidence says you're a security risk this ship cannot afford. The submarine shuddered as it altered course, diving deeper into the black waters. Sarah felt the pressure change in her ears, a physical manifestation of how quickly her world was collapsing. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice cracking. The real traitor is still out there, still feeding information to— Enough. Hughes drew his sidearm with practiced ease. Commander Chen, you will report to the brig immediately. Sarah looked from Hughes to Morrison, seeing her death warrant written in their faces. The brig on a nuclear submarine was little more than a reinforced closet, but it wasn't imprisonment she feared. It was what would happen to her country while she rotted in a cell, unable to stop the real conspiracy unfolding around them. I won't go quietly, she said, backing toward the bulkhead. Hughes smiled, the expression transforming his boyish features into something predatory. I was hoping you'd say that. The briefing room erupted into violence. Sarah dove to her left as Hughes's first shot sparked off the steel where her head had been. Morrison shouted something she couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. She rolled behind the holographic display table as alarms began wailing throughout the submarine. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red as Sarah scrambled for the door. Hughes's second shot shattered the tactical display, sending sparks cascading across her shoulders. She burst into the corridor to find armed security personnel already moving toward her position. "Stop!" she screamed, raising her hands. "I'm unarmed!" Master Chief Ramirez, a man she'd served with for 3 years, leveled his rifle at her chest. His dark eyes were filled with something that might have been regret, but his finger remained steady on the trigger. "Commander, you need to come with us," he said, his accented English thick with tension. "Rico, listen to me," Sarah pleaded, using his first name for the first time in their professional relationship. "Someone is framing me. The real traitor is using my access codes to—" Hughes emerged from the briefing room, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "She's armed and dangerous," he shouted. "Take her down!" Sarah saw Ramirez's eyes widen in confusion, his rifle wavering between her and Hughes. In that moment of hesitation, she made her choice. She ran. The Leviathan's corridors became a maze of terror as Sarah fled through the submarine's bowels. Her intimate knowledge of the ship's layout was her only advantage as security teams converged from multiple directions. She ducked through maintenance hatches, crawled through ventilation shafts, and used every trick she'd learned in her years aboard submarines to stay one step ahead of capture. But there was nowhere to run on a vessel 400 feet long and 30 feet wide, surrounded by millions of tons of crushing water. They cornered her in the missile compartment. Sarah stood among the towering launch tubes, each one containing enough nuclear firepower to level a major city. The irony wasn't lost on her, accused of being a traitor while surrounded by the weapons she'd sworn to protect. Through the steel grating beneath her feet, she could hear the submarine's massive reactor humming with barely contained energy. Morrison appeared at the compartment's entrance, flanked by security personnel. His service pistol was drawn, but pointed at the deck, and his weathered face showed the weight of command decisions that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time in months, "please, don't make this harder